I had been planning this trip for nearly 2 years. The Alaska Highway had always called to me. That legendary stretch of road carved through some of the most unforgiving wilderness on the North American continent. In the summer of 2021, I finally made it happen. I was 34 years old, recently divorced, and desperately in need of something to remind me that the world was bigger than the apartment walls I had been staring at for months. I converted my SUV into a proper camping rig over the course of 6 weeks. I installed a sleeping platform in the back, complete with a foam mattress and blackout curtains. I mounted a small propane stove to the tailgate and organized plastic bins full of dried food, water containers, and emergency supplies beneath the platform. I had a satellite communicator for emergencies, a first aid kit that could handle anything short of surgery, and enough tools to perform basic repairs on the vehicle if something went wrong. I thought I had prepared for everything. The one thing I could not prepare for, the one vulnerability that gnawed at me during the entire planning process, was the firearm situation. I always kept a pistol under my seat when I traveled alone through remote areas. It was never about paranoia or some fantasy of confrontation. It was simply insurance, a last resort if everything else failed. But Canada had strict laws about bringing firearms across the border, and I was not willing to risk imprisonment or having my vehicle seized over it. So I left the gun at home, locked in my safe, and told myself that millions of people drove this road every year without incident. I crossed the border at a small checkpoint in northern Montana on a Tuesday morning. The customs agent was polite but thorough, asking about my plans, checking my vehicle registration, and wishing me safe travels. The Canadian side of the border felt different immediately. The towns grew smaller and further apart. The forest pressed in closer to the road. The sky seemed wider somehow, as if the land itself was stretching out to accommodate something vast and indifferent. The first day of driving went smoothly. I covered roughly 400 miles, stopping twice for gas and once for a hot meal at a small diner, where the waitress asked if I was driving to Alaska, and then shook her head slowly when I confirmed it. She said nothing else, but the look in her eyes stayed with me longer than it should have. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the tree line, I was exhausted in a way that 8 hours behind the wheel always produces. My eyes ached. My lower back throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. I needed to stop to eat something warm and to sleep until my body forgave me for what I had put it through. The rest stops along this section of the highway were infrequent and often nothing more than gravel pullouts with a pit toilet and a garbage bin. But there were also unmarked trails that led to informal camping areas, places where people had been pulling off for decades to spend the night away from the road. I preferred these spots. They felt more private, more connected to the wilderness I had come here to experience. I found one just as the last light was fading from the sky. A narrow dirt track led off the highway and disappeared into a wall of spruce and pine. I followed it for perhaps a quarter mile before it opened into a small clearing. The ground was flat and covered with a carpet of brown needles. The trees surrounded the space on all sides, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy that blocked out most of the remaining daylight. I was alone. No other vehicles, no signs of recent habitation, nothing but the forest and the fading light and the sound of my own breathing as I shut off the engine. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. It was profound, that silence. Not peaceful exactly, but empty in a way that made me acutely aware of my own heartbeat. I put up my window shades, double-checked that all the doors were locked, and climbed into the back seat. The sleeping platform was comfortable enough, and I was tired enough that comfort barely mattered. I was asleep within minutes. I did not wake once during the night. When my eyes opened again, gray morning light was filtering through the edges of my window shades, and birds were calling from somewhere in the trees. I felt rested but stiff, my body protesting the cramped quarters. I needed to move, to stretch my legs and get my blood flowing before I spent another day folded into the driver's seat. The trail I had driven in on continued past my camping spot, winding deeper into the forest. I decided to follow it on foot, just for a short walk, just to see what was there. The morning air was cool and carried the sharp scent of pine resin and damp earth. My boots crunched softly on the needle-covered ground as I walked. After perhaps 5 minutes, the trail opened into another clearing. This one was larger than mine, with a fire pit in the center and flat areas around the perimeter where tents could be pitched. But something was wrong with this place. I felt it before I consciously registered what I was seeing. a visceral sensation of wrongness that made me stop at the edge of the clearing and scan the scene before me. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. A tent lay collapsed on the ground, its poles bent and its fabric torn in several places. Camping gear was scattered across the site in a way that spoke of violence or panic. A cooler had been overturned, its contents spilled across the dirt. Clothing hung from low branches as if it had been thrown there. A sleeping bag was unzipped and spread out near the fire pit, its surface marked with dark stains that I did not want to examine more closely. The fire pit itself still held the remnants of a recent blaze, the ashes gray and cold but not yet scattered by wind or rain. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, abandoning half of their belongings in what looked like a desperate flight. I stood at the edge of that clearing for perhaps 30 seconds, my mind racing through possibilities. A bear encounter? A sudden illness? Some kind of argument between camping partners that had turned violent? None of the explanations felt right. The scene was too chaotic, too incomplete. It looked like someone had been interrupted in the middle of the night and had run for their life, leaving everything behind. I turned around and walked back to my car. I did not run, but I walked quickly, my ears straining for any sound that did not belong to the forest. By the time I reached my clearing, my heart was beating faster than the short walk should have warranted. The truck was parked right next to my SUV. It was a full-sized pickup, all black, with windows tinted so dark that I could not see through them even in the morning light. It had not been there when I left for my walk. Someone had driven in within the last 5 minutes and parked deliberately close to my vehicle, close enough that the passenger side of the truck was almost touching my driver's door. I stopped walking and stood perhaps 20 feet away, staring at the truck. The engine was off. No sound came from inside. No movement was visible through those opaque windows. It just sat there, a black void occupying space that had been empty minutes before. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to be careful. The abandoned campsite, the timing of this arrival, the deliberate positioning of the truck, none of it was coincidental. I was suddenly very aware that I was alone, that I had no weapon, that the nearest town was hours away, and that nobody knew exactly where I was. I walked to my car slowly, keeping my eyes on the truck the entire time. I had to squeeze between the vehicles to reach my driver's door, and as I did, I could feel eyes on me through that tinted glass. I could not see them, but I knew someone was watching. The certainty of it was absolute. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. I did not stop to pack up my window shades properly. I did not stop to use the bathroom or eat breakfast or do any of the things I had planned to do that morning. I just drove, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that black truck. 3 hours later, I was still driving. My hands had finally stopped shaking, and my heart rate had returned to something approaching normal. I had been watching my rearview mirror obsessively, and the road behind me had remained empty. I was starting to feel foolish, starting to wonder if I had overreacted to what might have been a harmless coincidence. The gas station appeared around a bend in the road like a relic from another era. It was small and weathered, with a single pump standing on a cracked concrete pad. A hand-painted sign advertised gasoline and diesel. The building behind the pump looked like it might have been a general store once, but its windows were dark and no lights were visible inside. I had to stop. The fuel gauge was hovering near empty, and I had no idea how far the next station might be. I pulled up to the pump and shut off the engine, taking a moment to simply sit and breathe before getting out. The mountains were beautiful here. They rose on every side, their peaks still capped with snow, even in late summer. The air was crisp and clean, and carried the faint smell of wildflowers. I stood beside my car and filled the tank, watching the numbers on the pump climb with agonizing slowness. The pump was old, and the gas flowed at a trickle. I heard the truck before I saw it. The low rumble of a diesel engine echoed off the mountains, growing louder as it approached. I turned to look down the road and felt my stomach clench into a tight knot. It was the same truck, the same all-black pickup with the same impenetrable tinted windows. It pulled into the gas station and rolled up to the opposite side of the pump, stopping just a few feet away from where I stood. My hands were trembling as I watched the pump. The numbers seemed to crawl. $90, $95, $100. The tank was finally full. I replaced the nozzle, screwed on my gas cap, and got back in my car without once looking directly at the truck. As I pulled out of the station, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The truck had not moved. No one had gotten out. It just sat there, its engine idling, waiting. I drove for 6 more hours that day. I stopped once to eat a granola bar and drink some water, but I did not get out of the car. I just sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, watching the road behind me and counting the minutes until I felt safe enough to continue. By late afternoon, I knew I needed to find a place to stop for the night. I was exhausted, more from the stress than the driving, and my judgment was starting to suffer. I was making small mistakes, drifting in my lane, missing turns, forgetting to check my mirrors. If I did not rest soon, I was going to have an accident. I found a spot that seemed ideal for hiding. A narrow track branched off from the highway and curved immediately behind a thick stand of birch trees. Unless you were looking for it specifically, you would never know it was there. I followed the track for perhaps 100 yards until it dead-ended in a small natural alcove surrounded by dense brush on 3 sides. I spent the remaining daylight preparing my campsite. I cooked dinner on my propane stove and ate standing up, my back against a tree, watching the track that led back to the highway. I wanted so badly to set up my tent and sleep outside, to feel the open air and see the stars, but something would not let me. Some deep animal instinct was telling me to stay in the car, to keep the metal shell between myself and whatever might come in the night. When the sun went down, I climbed into the back of my SUV and locked all the doors. I did not put up my window shades this time. I wanted to be able to see out. I stayed awake that night, watching downloaded videos on my phone, trying to distract myself from the fear that had been building since morning. The screen cast a pale glow across the interior of the car, and I kept the volume low, barely loud enough to hear. Outside, the forest was absolutely dark. No moon penetrated the canopy. No stars were visible through the branches overhead. Around 11 o'clock, I heard footsteps. The sound was unmistakable. Dry sticks snapping under weight, leaves crunching. The deliberate, measured tread of a human being moving through the forest toward my car. I turned off my phone immediately, plunging myself into complete darkness, and pressed my back against the side of the vehicle away from the sound. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then a face appeared at my window. It was a man, his features barely visible in the darkness, pressed so close to the glass that his breath fogged the surface. He was staring directly at me, his eyes catching some faint reflection that made them gleam in the black. I could see the outline of his jaw, the shadow of stubble on his cheeks, the thin line of his lips pulled back in something that was not quite a smile. I threw myself toward the front seat, scrambling over the center console with a desperation that bordered on panic. I heard him move away from the window. I heard the second set of footsteps, running now, coming fast from the other direction. I was fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely grip them, when the sound of shattering glass filled the car. The back window exploded inward. A hand reached through, grasping for the door handle. I got the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life. The second man appeared at my driver's window, his fist raised to break through. I slammed the car into drive just as the back door swung open. I floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the soft ground, then caught, and the car lurched forward. I saw the black truck in my headlights, parked off to the side of the track, half hidden in the brush. They had found me somehow. They had followed me all this way, waited until dark, and come for me on foot so I would not hear their approach. I drove a mile before I felt safe enough to stop and close the back door that was still hanging open. My hands were shaking so violently that it took 3 attempts to engage the latch. Wind poured in through the broken window, cold and sharp against my neck. I had almost no cell service, but I managed to get a weak signal and called the police. The conversation was fragmented, cut short by dropped connections, but I gave them my location as best I could and described what had happened. They told me to drive to the nearest town and wait for them there. They told me not to stop for anything. I drove through the night, stopping only once to get gas in a town that was barely more than a single street with a few buildings on either side. The attendant looked at my broken window and asked if I was okay. I told him I had hit a deer. He did not believe me, but he did not ask any more questions. The police never found the men. The black truck was gone when they checked the area the next morning. There were tire tracks and footprints, and the broken glass from my window scattered across the ground, but nothing that could identify who had been there or where they had gone. The case remained open, but I knew it would never be solved. Some things happen in the wilderness that never get explained. I made it to Alaska. I spent the rest of my 2 months exploring glaciers and watching bears catch salmon and sitting beside cold rivers that ran clear as glass. It was everything I had hoped it would be, and more, but I never shook the memory of those 2 weeks on the highway. I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I had not heard those footsteps, if I had been asleep when they reached my car, if my keys had not found the ignition in time. Some nights I still dream about that face at the window. I dream about the sound of breaking glass and the feel of the cold wind rushing in. I dream about the black truck sitting in the darkness, waiting, and the 2 men who tracked me through hundreds of miles of wilderness with a patience that terrifies me more than anything else about that night. I never drove that road again, and I never travel without a way to protect myself, no matter what the laws say or what borders I have to cross. Some lessons you only need to learn once. October 2022. That's when everything happened. I need to write this down while the details remain sharp in my mind, though God knows I've tried to forget them. My closest friend Simon and I had planned this hike for weeks. The forecast predicted steady rain all day, with temperatures hovering around 45 degrees. Perfect weather, in my opinion. The combination of autumn foliage and rainfall created an atmosphere I'd always found peaceful. Simon shared my enthusiasm for these conditions, which made us outliers among our friend group. We selected Ridgeway Trail, a moderately challenging 7-mile loop through dense forest about 40 minutes from town. The drive there passed quickly as we discussed work frustrations and weekend plans. Simon worked nights at the hospital, while I maintained a standard office schedule. These Tuesday afternoon hikes had become our tradition, a time when both our schedules aligned. The parking area appeared completely deserted when we arrived at 2:30 p.m. Not a single vehicle occupied the gravel lot that could accommodate at least 20 cars. The rain had intensified during our drive, creating rivers of water that flowed down the windshield. We sat for a moment, watching the downpour, before pulling on our rain gear and stepping out. The trail entrance stood marked by a weathered wooden sign, listing distances and difficulty ratings. Mud had already formed in the initial section, our boots squelching with each step. The canopy above provided minimal shelter, allowing steady streams of water to cascade down through gaps in the leaves. Approximately 10 minutes into our trek, Simon stopped abruptly, his head turned toward the left, eyes focused on something among the trees. His sudden stillness made my stomach tighten, an inexplicable reaction to such a mundane moment. "You see that?" he asked, pointing through the undergrowth. I followed his gesture, squinting through the rain and shadows. At first, nothing stood out among the maze of trunks and branches. Then I spotted it, a pale oval shape roughly 20 feet from the trail. The more I stared, the more it resembled a human face watching us through the foliage. Probably just pareidolia, I suggested, using the technical term for seeing faces in random patterns, like seeing shapes in clouds. But Simon had already left the trail, pushing through wet ferns toward the object. I followed reluctantly, water from disturbed branches soaking through gaps in my jacket. As we approached, the face's features became clearer, too symmetrical, too defined to be natural. The mask had been secured to the tree trunk with a single nail through its forehead. A cheap Halloween mask, the kind sold at dollar stores every October. White plastic formed the base, with crude features painted in black. Rain had caused some paint to run, creating dark streaks like tears. The mask blended remarkably well with the pale bark, positioned at eye level behind a screen of branches. Simon reached up and worked the mask free from the nail. A folded piece of paper fell from behind it, protected from the rain by the mask's concave interior. He unfolded it carefully, shielding it with his body. The note contained a simple message written in block letters. Number 1. Go behind this tree and continue walking until you find number 2. This has to be some kind of geocaching thing, I reasoned, though unease crept through my chest. Or maybe a Halloween event the park organized. Simon shook his head. Look where we are. We're already off trail. No park would send kids deeper into unmarked forest. Against my better judgment, we followed the instruction. The forest grew denser as we moved away from the established path. Branches caught at our clothing, and several times we had to duck under low-hanging limbs heavy with rainwater. The ground became increasingly uneven, hidden roots and rocks threatening to trip us with each step. After perhaps 60 feet of bushwhacking, we discovered the second mask. This one lay partially buried in decomposing leaves at the base of a massive oak. Simon excavated it like an archaeologist, brushing away debris to reveal another cheap plastic face. The accompanying note directed us further into the wilderness. The pattern continued. Each mask led us deeper into unmarked territory, the messages growing progressively stranger. The third note included the phrase, "You're doing wonderfully." The fourth simply stated, "Almost there, friends." By the time we reached the fifth mask, we'd traveled what felt like a quarter-mile from any established trail. This final mask differed from the others, newer, cleaner, as if recently placed. Simon pried it from its tree and extracted the note, "See you soon." Those 3 words hung between us in the rain-soaked forest. The trees seemed to press closer, and I became acutely aware of every sound: dripping water, creaking branches, our own breathing. Something rustled in the underbrush to our right, then behind us, then to the left. The sounds might have been animals or wind, but they felt deliberate, calculated. We didn't discuss turning back. We simply started walking. Simon led the way, following our disturbed path through the undergrowth. The return journey felt longer, though logic dictated it covered the same distance. Several times I glanced over my shoulder, certain I'd glimpsed movement among the trees. The rain had transformed from steady drops to a genuine deluge by the time we reached the main trail. Water ran in streams down the path, turning sections into temporary creeks. We abandoned any pretense of staying dry and pressed forward, boots completely submerged with each step. The hike's remainder passed in tense silence. We'd planned to complete the full loop, but neither of us suggested turning back early. Pride, perhaps, or stubborn refusal to let fear dictate our actions. The masks weighed on our minds. Simon still carried them in his backpack, though I'd suggested leaving them behind. 3 hours after entering the forest, we emerged at the parking area. Relief flooded through me at the sight of my car, still alone in the lot. But as we approached, that relief evaporated. Another vehicle had arrived, a dark sedan parked directly beside mine, so close that our side mirrors nearly touched. The windows were fogged, making it impossible to see inside. No other spots were taken in the entire lot, yet this driver had chosen to park inches from my door. I had to enter from the passenger side and climb over the center console while Simon waited in the rain. Once I'd backed up enough for him to enter, we sat for a moment, staring at the sedan. "Should we wait to see who it is?" Simon asked. I shook my head and started the engine. As we pulled away, I watched the sedan in my rearview mirror. It remained motionless, windows still opaque, giving no indication of occupants. I dropped Simon at his apartment complex around 6:30 p.m. We'd spent the drive developing increasingly rational explanations for the mask's art project, teenage prank, social experiment. By the time I reached my own house, I'd almost convinced myself the entire experience had been overblown coincidence. My house, a modest 2-story rental on a quiet residential street, sat dark and welcoming after the day's strangeness. I went through my usual routine. Mail from the box, keys on the hook, wet clothes directly into the washer. Normal, mundane actions that pushed the forest encounter further from my mind. The football game provided perfect distraction. I ordered pizza, opened a beer, and settled into my recliner. For 3 hours, I lost myself in the familiar rhythm of plays and commercials. The masks became just another odd story to share at parties, assuming anyone would believe it. Around 11 p.m. I began preparing for bed. While brushing my teeth, a sound from outside caught my attention. Multiple car doors closing in quick succession, then footsteps on pavement, then nothing. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to finish my routine and go to sleep. Instead, I walked to the living room and approached the window. My hand trembled as I pulled back the curtain's edge. 5 figures stood on my front lawn in a rough semicircle. Each wore a white plastic mask identical to those from the forest. They stood perfectly still, faces turned toward my house, rain streaming off their dark clothing. I released the curtain and stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. How did they find me? How did they know? Racing upstairs to my bedroom, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm voice seemed surreal against my panic as I explained the situation. She assured me officers were en route. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. 10 minutes. An eternity when strangers stood on your lawn wearing masks from your nightmare hike. From my bedroom window, I maintained visual contact with the group. They'd begun moving, not walking, but swaying in unison, arms occasionally rising and falling in synchronized gestures. The movement resembled some form of ritual dance, though no music accompanied it. The doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then silence. Then the pattern repeated. Through my floor, I felt the vibrations as they began pounding on the front door directly below my room. Not knocking, throwing their full body weight against it. The house shook with each impact. They alternated between the doorbell and the pounding, creating a rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial. Ring, ring, ring. Slam. Ring, ring, ring. Slam. Between these assaults, they returned to their positions on the lawn, resuming their synchronized swaying. I called 911 again, voice cracking as I described the escalation. The same operator assured me units were close. Just a few more minutes. Those minutes stretched like hours. The pounding intensified, and I heard wood creaking under the assault. How long before the door gave way? Blue and red lights finally pierced the darkness. The effect on the masked figures was immediate. They scattered like roaches exposed to sudden light. 2 ran toward the street, 2 disappeared around the house's side, and 1 vaulted my back fence with surprising agility. 2 officers gave chase while a 3rd approached my front door. I met her on the porch, words tumbling out in a rush as I explained everything. The hike, the masks, the notes, the sedan, and now this. She took notes, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions. The pursuing officers returned within minutes, shaking their heads. The masked individuals had vanished into the neighborhood's maze of yards and alleys. No evidence remained, except my testimony and some footprints in the lawn, already filling with rainwater. The officer examined my front door, running her fingers along the frame. No damage, she observed. No attempted forced entry. Without physical evidence or identity of the perpetrators, there's limited action we can take tonight. She provided a case number and suggested I install security cameras. If they returned, I should call immediately. In the meantime, she'd have a patrol car circle the neighborhood periodically through the night. It felt inadequate, but I understood the legal limitations. After the police departed, I deadbolted the door and dragged a bookshelf in front of it. Every window got checked twice. I grabbed a baseball bat from the garage and placed it beside my bed, though I knew it offered more psychological than practical protection. Sleep never came that night. I sat in my bedroom chair, bat across my lap, watching the street through a gap in the curtains. Every shadow became a potential threat. Every sound settling house, wind against windows, neighbors' cats sent adrenaline surging through my system. Morning brought exhausted relief. I called in sick to work and drove to an electronics store the moment they opened. Within hours, I'd installed cameras covering every angle of my property. Motion sensor lights went up the following day. I even changed my locks, though logic suggested it was unnecessary. Simon experienced nothing unusual after our hike. No visitors, no disturbances. We discussed going to the police about the masks, but what crime had been committed. Leaving props in a public forest wasn't illegal. The notes contained no threats, just vague messages that could mean anything. I returned to the trail once, 2 weeks later, in broad daylight with 3 other friends. We found the tree where the first mask had been, identifiable by the nail hole in the bark, but the area behind it showed no signs of our passage. No disturbed undergrowth, no footprints, no indication anyone had traveled that route. Either nature had reclaimed the path remarkably quickly, or someone had deliberately obscured the trail. That was 14 months ago. The cameras have recorded nothing unusual since installation. The masks, which Simon still has, remain a disturbing mystery. Were they bait for a more sinister purpose? An elaborate prank that coincidentally targeted me? Or something else entirely, something I don't want to contemplate? Some nights, particularly when it rains, I stand at my window and watch the street. Part of me expects to see 5 figures materialize from the darkness. White masks reflecting streetlight as they take their positions on my lawn. They haven't returned, but the possibility haunts me. That final note echoes in my mind. See you soon. How soon is soon? Was their visit that night the fulfillment of that promise, or merely a preview? I may never know, but I keep the cameras running, the lights bright, and that baseball bat within reach. Because if they do return, I'll be ready. The rain outside has stopped now. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow marks exactly 1 year since that night. And perhaps I'm being paranoid, but anniversaries feel significant. If you're reading this and something has happened to me, check the camera footage. The truth will be there. But I hope God, how I hope that this remains just a story about a strange hike and an unexplained visit. Nothing more. The coffee at the Detroit bus station tasted like battery acid, but I drank it anyway. At $3 a cup, it was cheaper than the stuff at the cafe near my old apartment, the one I'd been evicted from 6 weeks ago. I was living in my '98 Honda Civic now, parked behind a 24-hour gym where I'd bought a membership just to shower. $29 a month. Everything came down to dollars anymore. My name is Warren Hayes, and before I became what I am now, I was a staff sergeant in the Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan, an honorable discharge, and a PTSD diagnosis that made civilian employers nervous. I'd burned through my savings in Detroit trying to make rent while working security at a warehouse for $13 an hour. My favorite things used to be simple: Tigers games, fishing on Lake St. Clair, my grandmother's pierogi recipe. Now my favorite thing was finding a parking lot where nobody would knock on my window at 2 a.m. The man who sat down across from me didn't look like he belonged in a bus station. His coat was too nice, his shoes too clean. He set a manila folder on the table between us. "Warren Hayes?" he asked. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Curtis Brennan. I work for a branch of the federal government that you've never heard of." He slid the folder toward me. "We've been watching you. Your military record is exemplary. Your current situation is..." I didn't open the folder. "If you're about to offer me something illegal..." "Nothing illegal. Dangerous, yes. Classified, absolutely." He leaned forward. "We investigate disappearances in remote areas. Specific kinds of disappearances. The kind that don't make sense. And you want me because you've seen things that don't make sense before. Afghanistan. That village in Helmand Province. November 2019. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. Nobody talked about that village. We'd been ordered not to. The bodies we'd found, arranged in patterns that were older than any of us could understand. The sounds in the mountains that followed us for 3 days. "We'll pay you $65,000 a year," Curtis continued. "Plus hazard bonuses. Full benefits. Housing stipend." I opened the folder. Inside were photographs of missing people. Dozens of them. Faces smiling at cameras. Unaware of what was coming. Beneath the photos was a contract and a non-disclosure agreement. As thick as a phone book. "What exactly am I looking for?" I asked. Curtis's expression didn't change. "Things that shouldn't exist. Things that our ancestors warned us about in stories." I signed the contract that night. I told myself it was just the money. I needed the money. But that would have been a lie. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a forest in northern Michigan with 3 other people I just met. The trees here grew so thick that noon felt like dusk. Our boots crunched on frost-hardened leaves. The team leader was a woman named Grace Morrison. Mid-30s. Former FBI. She carried herself like someone who'd seen her share of horrors, and filed them away in neat mental folders. Next to her was Kirk something. I never caught his last name. A tracker with the National Park Service who barely spoke. And then there was Lily Chen, our tech specialist who looked barely old enough to drink but had 3 advanced degrees in subjects I couldn't pronounce. Victim's name was Harold Pritchett, Grace said, studying a tablet. 57 years old, experienced hunter. Went missing 4 days ago. His truck was found at the trailhead. Keys still in the ignition, wallet and phone on the dashboard. His rifle was propped against a tree, exactly 2 miles in. No signs of struggle. No blood. No tracks leading away. "How is that possible?" I asked. Grace looked at me with eyes that had stopped expecting answers to make sense. "That's what we're here to find out." Kirk knelt beside a cluster of trees, touching the bark. Something marked these. Recently, the scratches were deep, running vertically down the trunk in sets of 3. Too high for a bear. Wrong pattern for a deer. Lily checked her equipment, motion sensors, thermal cameras, audio recorders, all the tech in the world to measure the measurable. EM readings are spiking. We're getting interference patterns consistent with... She trailed off. "With what?" I asked. With things that aren't supposed to exist. We found Harold's rifle where Grace said it would be. It was leaning against a white oak, barrel pointing up, like someone had carefully placed it there. The safety was still on. No rounds fired. He wouldn't have left this behind voluntarily, Kirk said. Not out here. Not at night. I picked up the rifle. It was cold. Colder than the air around us. When I turned it over, I saw something carved into the wooden stock. Fresh cuts. 3 words in shaky letters. It called me. Grace photographed the carving. Pack it up. We're setting up base camp before dark. Nobody goes anywhere alone. And Warren, she looked at me directly. Whatever you hear tonight, don't answer it. Don't go looking. Don't follow voices. Especially if they sound like someone you know. We hiked another mile to a clearing where previous teams had established a camp. There were solar panels, battery packs, floodlights. In the center stood something that looked like a watchtower, just a platform with railings, 12 feet high. Kirk climbed up with a thermos of coffee and a night vision scope. Overnight watch, Grace explained. 2-hour shifts. Warren, you take second watch at midnight. As darkness fell, the forest changed. The normal sounds, birds, insects, wind through leaves, faded away. The silence was absolute. Wrong. I'd been in quiet places before, but this was different. This was the quiet of something holding its breath. Lily set up her equipment in a tight perimeter around our tents. If anything crosses these sensors, we'll know. The cameras will catch it. Will they? Grace asked softly. At 9 p.m., we heard the first sound. A voice, distant and distorted, calling out, "Help me! Please, someone help me!" It was a man's voice. Harold's voice, maybe. It came from deep in the woods, from the direction we'd been heading. Kirk was on watch. He didn't move, didn't respond, just kept looking through his scope, scanning the tree line. The voice called again. "I'm hurt. Please. I can't move." Every instinct I had screamed to respond. To help. That's what you did when someone called for help. But I remembered Grace's warning. I remembered the scratches on the trees. I remembered the words carved into the rifle stock. It called me. Grace was watching me, her hand resting on the holster at her hip. Not a threat. A precaution. Making sure I didn't do anything stupid. The voice called for 20 minutes, growing more desperate, more anguished. Then it stopped. At 11:45 p.m., something triggered Lily's sensors. All of them, simultaneously. The cameras showed nothing but darkness and trees. The thermal imaging showed nothing. The audio picked up a sound like wind, but there was no wind. The motion sensors registered something large, moving in a circle around our camp, staying just beyond the range of our lights. Grace, Lily, and I stood in the center of the clearing, back to back, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Kirk stayed on the tower, silent as stone. "What is it?" Lily whispered, her scientific composure finally cracking. "I don't know," Grace admitted, "but it's been watching us since we arrived." At midnight exactly, the circling stopped. The sensors went quiet. Whatever had been out there was gone, or wanted us to think it was gone. I climbed the tower for my watch. Kirk descended without a word, his face pale in the moonlight. From 12 feet up, I could see the forest spreading in every direction, dark and infinite. I thought about Harold Pritchett, who'd walked into these woods and never walked out. I thought about my Civic in Detroit, everything I owned crammed into garbage bags in the back seat. I thought about the $65,000 I was earning to sit in this tower and wait for something that shouldn't exist to show itself. Somewhere in the darkness, something screamed. Not an animal, not human, something in between. My 2 hours felt like 2 days. Morning came slowly, the sun barely penetrating the canopy. We'd all heard the screaming throughout the night 3 more times, each from a different direction, each sounding like it was circling closer. None of us had slept much. Grace spread a topographical map across a folding table. "I need to show you something." She marked locations with a red pen. Harold Pritchett disappeared here. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Evelyn Cross vanished 6 miles west. 2 months before that, Craig Weatherby, 4 miles north. Going back 18 months, we have 12 disappearances in this forest alone. 12? I asked. Why haven't I heard about this? Because we classify them as lost hikers. Presumed dead. Cases closed. Grace connected the marked points with lines. But look at the pattern. The lines formed a shape. Not quite a circle, not quite random. Something organic, like a spiral, with our camp near the center. Lily pulled up digital overlays on her tablet. I cross-referenced with older records, National Park Service data, county sheriff reports, even Native American oral histories from the Ottawa and Ojibwa tribes. Disappearances have been happening here for over 200 years. Not constantly, but in cycles. Every 20 to 30 years there's a spike, then nothing. What changed? I asked. Why are we seeing them now? Kirk finally spoke, his voice rough from hours of silence. We're in a spike year. Started last October. Won't end until... He paused. Until it's satisfied. Until what's satisfied? No one answered. We broke camp at 0800 hours and moved deeper into the search pattern. Kirk led us to locations where he'd found signs. Broken branches, disturbed earth, patches of ground where nothing grew. Each site had the same 3 scratch marks on nearby trees. The scratches are a marker, Kirk explained. Territory. Warning. Maybe both. At the 3rd site we found something new. A circle of stones, each about the size of a fist, arranged in the dirt. In the center was a bundle of sticks tied with dried grass, standing upright. It looked like something from a documentary about ancient rituals. Don't touch it, Grace ordered when Lily moved closer. It's not old, Lily observed. This was made recently, days ago, maybe. Harold? I suggested. Or whatever took him. Kirk was already backing away from the circle. We need to leave, now, but Grace was examining the bundle, photographing it from every angle. This is a message. A warning. A claim. Curtis said we'd see signs like this. Evidence of intelligence, of purpose. What purpose? I demanded. What the hell are we dealing with out here? Grace finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. We don't have names for them, Warren. Not real names. Just the words from old stories. Wendigo. Skinwalker. Not deer. The things that came before us and never left. The things that learned to mimic us. It called me. The words from Harold's rifle made horrible sense now. We documented the site and continued our search pattern, moving in a widening spiral. The forest felt wrong here, the trees growing in twisted shapes, the ground spongy beneath our feet. My military training kept me focused. Eyes forward, weapon ready. Trust your squad. But my instincts were screaming that we were being herded. At 1300 hours, Kirk froze. Listen, we heard it. Footsteps. Human footsteps, crunching through leaves, coming from ahead of us. On our planned route. Someone's out there, Lily whispered. The footsteps continued. Steady, purposeful, not running, not hiding, just walking. Grace raised her radio. This is Team 7. We have possible civilian contact. Proceeding with caution. She signaled us forward. We rounded a massive oak tree and saw him. Harold Pritchett. Alive. Standing in a clearing, his back to us, wearing the same hunting jacket from his missing person photo. Harold? Grace called out. Harold Pritchett? We're federal agents. You're safe now. He didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge us. Just stood there, perfectly still. Kirk grabbed Grace's arm. No.
What?
That's not him. Look at how he's standing. Harold's posture was wrong. Too rigid. His arms hung at his sides, not quite natural. And he wasn't breathing. I could see that from 30 feet away. His back didn't rise and fall. He was simply standing there, like a mannequin. Harold? Grace tried again. Can you hear me? The thing that looked like Harold Pritchett slowly turned around. His face was perfect. Too perfect. Like someone had made a mask from a photograph, capturing every detail but missing something essential. His eyes were open but empty. His mouth hung slack. There was no recognition. No consciousness, just a hollow shell wearing Harold's features. Fuck, Lily breathed. The Harold thing took a step toward us, then another. Its movements were jerky, puppet-like, as if something was learning how to operate a human body and hadn't quite mastered it yet. Back away, Grace ordered. Slowly, don't run. We retreated as the thing advanced. It didn't speak, didn't make any sound, just kept walking, arms swinging unnaturally. That vacant face fixed on us. Then, from behind it, we heard laughter. A child's laughter. High and bright, completely out of place. The Harold thing stopped walking. its head tilted to one side, too far, at an angle that would break a human neck. More laughter. From our left, our right, behind us. Children laughing, but wrong somehow. The timing off, the pitch distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Defensive formation, Grace commanded. We formed a circle, backs together, weapons out. I had my service pistol, though I had no idea if bullets would stop whatever was out there. The Herald thing collapsed, just dropped like a puppet with cut strings, falling face first into the leaves. When it hit the ground, it didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't do anything, because it had never been alive. The laughter stopped. The forest was silent again. Grace approached the body cautiously. Kirk covered her, his rifle steady. When she knelt beside it, I saw her hand shake for the first time. Jesus Christ. What is it? I asked. This isn't Harold. I mean, it looks like him, but it's not even human. She turned the body over. Harold's face was a mask. Literally, a layer of something organic but wrong, stretched over a frame of sticks and bone that barely resembled a human skeleton. The thing was hollow inside, like a costume designed to walk around until it found an audience. It wanted us to see it, Lily said. It wanted us to follow, or it wanted to see how we'd react, Kirk added. Testing us. Grace stood, wiping her hands on her pants as if she could wipe away what she'd just touched.
We're pulling out. Now, this is beyond our parameters.
What about Harold? I asked. The real Harold? Grace looked at the thing on the ground, then at the forest surrounding us. Harold's gone, Warren. He's been gone since the moment he walked into these woods. We hiked back to camp at double time, constantly checking behind us. Seeing nothing but feeling everything. The forest watched us leave. I could sense its attention, patient and ancient and hungry. When we reached our equipment, Lily went straight to her monitoring station. Oh no. What? The overnight recordings. I just reviewed them. She played back thermal footage from 0300 hours. The screen showed our camp from above, our tents visible as bright spots of heat, and around the perimeter, just beyond our lights, dozens of cold shapes, human-shaped but cold as the surrounding air, standing in a perfect circle, watching us sleep. They were there all night. Lily whispered. Standing there, waiting. Grace made a decision. Pack everything. We're evacuating to the rendezvous point. Radio Curtis, tell him we need immediate extraction and a full tactical team. Whatever's out here, it's not operating alone. As we broke down the camp, I couldn't shake the image from the thermal footage. All those shapes, standing in the darkness, waiting, patient. And I realized the horrible truth: we hadn't been hunting something in these woods. We'd been invited to play. The evacuation order was denied. Grace spent 20 minutes on the satellite phone with Curtis, her voice rising with each passing minute. The rest of us packed equipment ready to move the moment we got clearance. When Grace finally ended the call, her face was ashen. We're not leaving, she said. The fuck we're not, Kirk replied. The most words he'd strung together since I'd met him. Curtis says we don't have full confirmation of an anomalous entity. The thing we found, the Herald construction, could be explained as a human perpetrator. Someone playing games. You saw it, Lily protested. That wasn't human craftsmanship. The biomechanics alone. I know what I saw. Grace cut her off. But headquarters needs proof. Video evidence of the actual entity. Direct confrontation. Something that can't be explained away. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They want us to make contact. They want us to complete the mission. Find Harold Pritchett or confirm his death. Document the nature of the threat. Then we extract. That's insane, I said. We're not equipped for this. We need tactical support, weapons at least. We have what we have. Grace's voice was flat. This is the job, Warren. The job you signed up for. The job I took because I was living in my car. The job that paid $65,000 a year to walk into nightmares and document them for people who sat in air-conditioned offices in Washington. I thought about Detroit, about sleeping in gym parking lots, about the hollow feeling of being one emergency away from complete destitution. This was still better. Probably. We modified our plan. Kirk would scout ahead using game trails and high ground, staying in radio contact. Lily would monitor from a mobile station, tracking our vitals and movements. Grace and I would continue the search pattern, looking for actual evidence of Harold or what had happened to him. The scratched trees were everywhere now. We'd stopped counting after 50. They formed corridors through the forest, guiding us deeper into territory that felt increasingly wrong. The trees here were diseased, bark peeling, branches bare even though it was only late autumn. Nothing grew in the undergrowth. The ground was just leaves and rot. "This is a dead zone," Grace observed. "The ecosystem is collapsing. Whatever's here, it's killing the forest." Kirk's voice crackled over the radio. "I've got structures. Man-made. Quarter-mile ahead. Bearing 320. We found them in a depression between two hills. Shelters, or what was left of them. Rough wooden frames covered with bark and branches, built against the hillside. They'd been here for years, decades maybe, slowly falling apart, but someone had been maintaining them. The materials were rotting, but the construction was sound. Homeless camp? I suggested. Maybe. Grace entered one of the structures, flashlight cutting through the shadows. I followed. Inside was a sleeping bag, moldy but still intact. A backpack hung from a hook made of bone. Canned goods lined a makeshift shelf, their labels faded, and on the wall carved deep into the bark were words, hundreds of words, covering every surface, written in different hands, different tools, spanning what looked like years. It watches. "Don't sleep," heard my daughter crying. She's been dead 10 years. The things in the trees aren't birds. Harold was here. That last one was fresh. Carved recently, the wood still bright beneath. "He survived," Grace said. "After he disappeared, he made it here. He was trying to shelter." I examined the other carvings. Dates, when they were legible, went back to 1987. Names I recognized from Lily's research. Craig, Evelyn, others who'd vanished in these woods. They'd all ended up here in these shelters, trying to hide from something. "Then where are they now?" I asked. Grace didn't answer. She was reading the carvings, her light moving from message to message. The final words, carved lowest, most recently.
"Can learn my voice."
"Don't trust anything. I'm going to make it stop." He left, Grace realized. He went after it. Kirk's voice burst through the radio. "Grace, Warren, move now. I've got multiple contacts converging on your position. Fast movers coming from all directions." We ran. The shelters disappeared behind us as we crashed through dead vegetation, heading for higher ground where Kirk had set up his observation post. Behind us, I heard them. Footsteps. Dozens of footsteps, moving through the forest with impossible coordination. And voices, calling out, "Warren! Warren, wait! It's me! It's Harold! I need help!" Harold's voice, desperate and frightened. But Harold was dead, or changed, or something worse. I kept running. "Grace, please. Grace, I'm hurt. I can't make it alone." Grace's father's voice. She'd told me about him during training. Dead from cancer 5 years ago. The thing knew. It had pulled the voice from somewhere in her head. More voices joined. Family. Friends. People we'd loved and lost. A chorus of the dead calling us back, begging us to stop and listen and help. "Don't answer," Grace shouted. "Don't even look back." We reached Kirk's position, a rocky outcrop overlooking the dead zone. He was prone with his rifle, scanning the forest below. "They stopped at the tree line," he reported, not following any more. I looked down. The forest floor was alive with movement. Figures, human-shaped, standing among the dead trees. Dozens of them. In the fading afternoon light, they looked almost real. Almost. "Are those all?" Lily's voice came through the radio from base camp. "Constructs," Grace confirmed. "Like the one we found. Dozens of them." I focused on one figure at the edge of the group. It stood differently from the others. More naturally. It was looking up at us, and even from 200 yards away I could see its face. Harold Pritchett. The real one. He was alive. Emaciated, filthy. His hunting clothes hanging off a frame that had lost 30 pounds, but alive. He was staring directly at us. And his mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear at this distance. "That's him," I said. "Grace, that's actually him." She pulled out binoculars. "Jesus. You're right. But he's not running. He's not signaling for help. He's just standing there." Kirk adjusted his scope. "Because he can't. Look at his legs." Harold's pants were torn at the ankles. Wrapped around his lower legs were thick vines, grown into his skin, rooting him in place. He wasn't standing with the constructs. He was trapped among them, being slowly absorbed into whatever they were. We have to get him out, I said. How? Kirk asked. The moment we go down there, we're surrounded. Harold's mouth moved again. This time I had binoculars. I could read his lips. Kill me. Then the constructs moved. All at once, with perfect synchronization, they turned and walked back into the forest. Harold went with them, dragged along by the vines, disappearing into the shadows. What the hell was that? I asked. A message, Grace said quietly. It's showing us what happens, what it does to people. It's not just killing them, it's keeping them, using them. Then we go after him tonight, I said. Full gear, lights, weapons. We cut him loose and we run. We'll be torn apart, Kirk said. Maybe. But we came here to find Harold Pritchett. We found him. And I'm not leaving him down there. Grace was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, she nodded. We move at 2200 hours. 4-hour window before dawn. Kirk, you're on overwatch with night vision. Warren and I go in. Lily, you keep every camera pointed at those trees and you document everything. If we don't make it out, at least Curtis will have his proof. We spent the remaining daylight preparing. I checked my pistol, loaded extra magazines, tested my flashlight. Kirk selected a position with clear fields of fire. Grace reviewed maps of the area, plotting escape routes. Lily called from base camp. I'm seeing something on the monitors. Temperature variations. The constructs, they generate no heat. But there's something else down there. Something big. It's been stationary for the last hour, right in the center of the dead zone. The source, Grace said. Whatever's making the constructs, whatever took Harold. Do we even have a plan for that? I asked. Grace looked at me. Survive. Document. Extract. In that order. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds. Not natural sounds. Mimicry. Wolves that didn't quite howl right. Birds that sang in human voices. And underneath it all, a low humming that I felt more than heard, vibrating through the ground through my bones. At 2200 hours, we descended into the dead zone. The night vision goggles turned the forest into a green nightmare. Every shadow was a threat, every tree a hiding place. Grace moved ahead, her movements professional and controlled. I covered our six, constantly scanning behind us. Kirk's voice was a steady presence in our earpieces, guiding us through the safest routes he could identify from his vantage point. 30 yards to the shelters, he reported. No movement detected. But Warren, Grace, my thermal is picking up that large signature Lily mentioned. It's close, maybe 50 yards past the shelters. Acknowledged, Grace whispered. We reached the first shelter.
Empty.
The carved warnings on the walls seemed to pulse in the green light. It watches. I had no doubt that was true right now. The second shelter held something new. Fresh blood, still wet, pooled on the ground. A trail led deeper into the dead zone, toward where Lily's monitors had detected the heat signature. Harold's blood, maybe, or someone else's. We follow it, Grace decided. That's exactly what it wants, Kirk warned. I know. The blood trail led us through the dying forest, past more of the scratched trees, past stone circles and stick bundles arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The humming grew louder, more insistent. My head started to ache. Then the trees opened into a clearing, and we saw it. The thing at the center was massive. At first I thought it was a pile of debris. Branches, bones, earth, all compressed together. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it had structure, purpose. It was shaped roughly like a person. If a person was 15 feet tall and made of everything the forest had discarded. Antlers formed its crown. Animal skulls studded its torso. And running through it all, binding it together, were those same vines we'd seen on Harold's legs. It was dormant, or appeared to be. No movement. The heat signature Lily detected was coming from inside it. From the core of whatever this thing was. Grace raised her camera, documenting everything. In my peripheral vision, I saw them. The constructs. Dozens of them, standing in a perfect circle around the clearing. Motionless. Watching. Grace, I whispered. We have company. I see them. Keep moving. We circled the central figure, looking for Harold. The constructs didn't move, didn't react. They just stood there, their empty faces tracking our progress. Then I heard it. A voice weak but human. Here, I'm here, behind the giant figure. Partially hidden by its mass, Harold Pritchett sat on the ground. The vines had climbed higher, wrapping around his waist, his chest. He was being pulled slowly into the ground, inch by inch, becoming part of whatever this thing was. Grace reached him first, pulling out a knife. "Harold, we're going to get you out. Stay still." She started cutting the vines. They were tough, fibrous, and they bled when cut. A clear fluid that stank of decay. Harold gasped as she severed each one, like she was cutting into his flesh directly. "It's inside me," he said, his voice hoarse. "The vines. They're growing inside me. In my lungs. My veins. You can cut what you see, but there's more. So much more. We'll get you to a hospital," I told him, helping Grace cut. "They can..." "No." Harold grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me. I've been here for days. I've seen what it does. It doesn't kill people. It transforms them, takes them apart and puts them back together wrong. The constructs, they used to be people, recent people. It keeps making more." Kirk's voice crackled in my ear. "Movement. All of them. The constructs are advancing." I looked up. The circle was closing in. Slowly, deliberately, the constructs walked toward us. Their faces were blank, but their hands were reaching out, grasping. "Work faster," I told Grace. She cut the last visible vine. Harold tried to stand and immediately collapsed, coughing blood. Real blood, not the clear fluid. "My lungs," he gasped. "It's already in my lungs." "We're carrying you out," Grace decided. "Warren, help me." The ground shook. The massive figure at the center of the clearing moved. It didn't stand so much as unfold. Segments of its body shifting and rearranging with sounds like breaking wood and grinding stone. The antlers rose up, up, up. The skull-studded torso expanded. Arms longer than my body reached out, fingers made of sharpened bone clicking together. And it looked at us. Not with eyes. It had no eyes, but with an awareness that crashed over me like a physical force. It saw us. It knew us. Every fear, every memory, every person we'd ever loved. It pulled all of that out of our heads and examined it with alien curiosity. "Run!" Kirk screamed in our earpieces. Grace grabbed Harold's arm. I took the other. We hauled him to his feet and ran, half dragging him between us. Behind us, the giant thing moved, each step shaking the earth. The constructs closed in from all sides. "Left, left." Kirk guided us through the chaos. "There's a gap in the circle, bearing 270. Go now." We burst through the line of constructs, Grace firing her pistol to clear the path. The bullets passed through them like they were made of smoke. They didn't fall, didn't slow, just kept reaching with those grasping hands. One of them touched Harold's leg. He screamed, a sound I'll never forget. Where the construct touched him, his flesh began to change, turning gray and fibrous, the transformation spreading from the point of contact. Grace cut the construct's hand off with her knife. It fell to the ground and kept moving, crawling after us on its fingers. "The shelters," Harold gasped between coughs. "There's a cave behind the shelters. It doesn't go there. Can't go there." "Why not?" I asked. "Wrong kind of earth. Or wrong kind of belief. I don't know. But the native warnings I found carved inside, they're old. Really old. That place is protected somehow." We ran for the shelters, the giant thing crashing through the forest behind us. Trees splintered. The ground heaved. And all around us the constructs closed in, their numbers seeming to multiply with each passing second. Kirk's rifle barked from his position. "I'm trying to slow it down. Get to cover." The shelters appeared ahead. Grace pointed to the hillside behind them. "There. I see the opening, a crack in the rock face barely wide enough for a person." We shoved Harold through first, then squeezed in after him. The cave beyond was small, maybe 10 feet deep, the walls covered in ancient carvings, symbols I didn't recognize predating anything European. They pulsed with faint luminescence, like dying stars. The giant thing reached the cave entrance. Its massive hand, bone fingers clicking, reached into the opening, and stopped. It couldn't enter. Something about this place. The symbols, the stone, some ancient protection kept it out. The hand withdrew. The thing stood outside, waiting. The constructs gathered around it. A forest of false humans, patient and eternal. We were trapped, but we were alive. Harold coughed again, more blood. In the dim light of our flashlights, I could see the vines under his skin, spreading like dark rivers through his veins. He was changing. The process had started before we'd even found him, and now it was accelerating. "How long does the transformation take?" Grace asked him, her voice clinical, already preparing her report. Harold looked at his hands. The fingers were elongating, the skin taking on that gray, fibrous quality. "Hours, maybe. I don't know. I've been fighting it, but..." He met my eyes. "You can't let me leave here. Not like this. If I change, if I become one of them, I'll know how to find people. I'll lead them here. I'll make more." "We're not giving up on you," I said. "I'm not asking you to give up. I'm asking you to stop it, before I'm gone." He pulled a pistol from his jacket, the one that had been missing from his gear. "I was going to do it myself, but I'm too weak now. Can't even hold it steady." Grace took the gun, checked the chamber. 1 round left. "This is your choice, Harold," she asked. He nodded. "I saw what it does to people. What it did to Evelyn, to Craig, to all the others. They're still in there, somewhere, aware but not in control. Puppets that remember being human. I won't be that." Kirk's voice crackled. "Grace, what's happening?" "The thing's just standing there, waiting." "It knows we're trapped," Grace replied. "It can wait longer than we can." Harold's breathing was getting worse, wet and labored. The vines were in his lungs now, probably his heart. "Hours," he'd said. But looking at him, I'd guess minutes. "Do it now," he whispered. "Please, while I'm still me." Grace raised the pistol. Her hands were steady. "Warren, you don't have to be here for this." But I stayed. If Harold could face this, I could witness it. "Thank you," Harold said, "for trying, for coming this far. Tell my wife, tell her I didn't suffer. Tell her it was quick." Grace pulled the trigger. The shot echoed in the small cave, defining the boundaries of our protection. Harold's body slumped against the wall, finally at peace. The vines under his skin stopped moving, withering to black threads. Whatever had been changing him, it couldn't continue without a living host. Grace holstered her weapon. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. "Grace, Warren, what happened?" Kirk demanded over the radio. "I heard a shot. Harold's gone," Grace reported. By his own request. Transformation was too far advanced. Jesus. A pause. The big one's moving, backing away from the cave. The constructs are following it. I moved to the cave entrance, staying in the protected zone. Kirk was right. The giant thing was withdrawing, the constructs moving with it like a receding tide. Within minutes, they'd disappeared back into the dead zone, leaving us alone with our failure. Lily's voice joined the channel, shaky with exhaustion. "I got it all on video. All of it. Curtis can't deny what we saw now." "No," Grace agreed. "He can't." We waited until dawn before leaving the cave. The forest was silent in that hollow. Wrong way it had been since we'd arrived. Harold's body lay where he'd died, and we couldn't carry him out. The best we could do was document his location, photograph the evidence of the vines, and promise to send a recovery team. I hoped they'd find human remains when they came back. I hoped the forest hadn't already reclaimed him. The hike back to base camp took 3 hours. We moved carefully, weapons ready, expecting ambush at every turn. But nothing came. The constructs were gone. The giant thing silent. The forest had returned to its patient waiting. Kirk met us at the camp perimeter. His face was gray with fatigue and something deeper. "I watched through the scope while you were in there," he said. "I saw that thing. Saw how it moved. That's not a predator. It's not even an animal. It's more like a process, like watching a plant grow, or a river flow. Natural but not alive the way we understand life." "Did you see where it went?" Grace asked. "Back to its center point. Sank into the ground, like it was never there." He paused. "Grace, I've been doing this work for 4 years. I've seen things that shouldn't exist. But that's not something we can fight. That's something we can only avoid." Lily had packed up most of our equipment. Her hands shook as she worked. The EM reading spiked at 0347, right when Harold died. Then they collapsed completely. Whatever that thing is, it's connected to the people it transforms. When Harold was freed, it felt it. "Did it feel anger?" I asked. "I don't think it feels anything we'd recognize. But it noticed, and it remembered." We called for extraction at 0900. Curtis himself answered the radio. Status, he asked. Grace delivered her report in crisp professional language. Location of the entity. Number of constructs. Harold's death. The video evidence. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Copy that, Curtis finally said. Extraction team is inbound. ETA 6 hours. Well done, Team 7. Well done, I repeated after Grace cut the connection. We lost him. We found Harold Pritchett and he died anyway. We documented an entity that's been killing people for 200 years. Grace replied. We proved it exists. We gathered data on its behavior, its capabilities, its territory. That's the mission, Warren. That's always the mission. The mission is finding people. Saving people. No. Grace's voice was hard. The mission is learning how to fight things that shouldn't exist. Rescuing individuals is secondary. If we can save someone, we do. But the information always comes first. Because the information saves more lives in the long run. I understood then. Really understood what this job was. We weren't rescue workers. We were researchers. And the missing people, Harold, Evelyn, Craig, all of them, they were data points. Necessary losses in the process of understanding what hunted in the dark places. The evacuation helicopter came at 1500, touching down in a clearing 2 miles from our camp. We loaded the equipment, the video files, the samples Lily had collected, Harold's rifle, with its carved warning. Everything went into sealed containers, cataloged and documented. As the helicopter lifted off, I looked down at the forest. The dead zone was invisible from here, just another patch of wilderness among thousands. But it was down there waiting, and the thing at its center was still alive, still growing, still pulling people into its embrace. Where will they send us next? I asked Grace. She was reviewing her mission report on a tablet, making final corrections. Oregon, probably. We've got a cluster of disappearances around Mount Hood. Similar patterns. Same 20-year cycle. Is it the same thing? No. Each region has its own entity, its own folklore. The Pacific Northwest has different stories than Michigan. She looked up at me. But they all take people, Warren. They all make constructs. They all follow patterns we're only beginning to understand. Kirk was asleep in his seat, or pretending to be. Lily stared out the window, her usual analytical expression broken by something raw and frightened. We were all changed by what we'd seen, but we'd be back out here in days or weeks, walking into another forest, looking for another missing person, facing another thing that shouldn't exist. Because the pay was good. Because someone had to do it. Because once you've seen what's really out there, you can't pretend the world is safe anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from Curtis. Your hazard bonus for this mission has been processed. Your next assignment briefing is Tuesday. $15,000. Add that to my salary, and I could afford an apartment again. Not in Detroit. Too many memories there, but somewhere I could sleep without fear of cops knocking on my window. Somewhere I could keep my favorite things safe. Maybe I'd even buy a Tigers ticket, watch a game, pretend to be normal for an afternoon. I texted back, confirmed for Tuesday. The helicopter carried us south, away from the forest. Below, Michigan spread out like a map, thousands of square miles of wilderness. And in that wilderness, in the spaces between towns, in the dark places where cell phones don't work and GPS signals fade, they waited. The things from old stories, the things that had learned patience, the things that called to us in familiar voices. I thought about Harold's final words. Tell my wife it was quick. I'd write that in my report. I'd lie. Because the truth that he'd spent days trapped and transforming. That he'd fought the change until he couldn't fight anymore. That his last act was begging strangers to kill him. That truth served no purpose except pain. The helicopter landed at a private airfield. A medical team was waiting to examine us, making sure we hadn't brought any contamination back with us. Standard procedure after field contact. They drew blood, scanned for anomalies, asked questions about symptoms. We all passed. Curtis met us in a debriefing room. He was older than his voice suggested, maybe 60, with eyes that had seen too much and categorized all of it. He reviewed Grace's report, watched 10 seconds of the video footage, and nodded. Good work. The evidence is conclusive. We'll classify the Michigan site as a Wendigo class entity, non-mobile, feeding cycle active. Standard protocols, quarantine the zone, Increase monitoring. Prepare containment strategies for the next spike cycle. He looked at each of us. You all performed admirably under extreme conditions. Take 3 days personal leave, then report for Oregon assignment. What about Harold's wife? I asked. Curtis pulled out a file. Mrs. Carol Pritchett, age 59, lives in Lansing. Local authorities will inform her that her husband's remains were recovered. Natural causes, exposure, closed casket recommended. She'll receive death benefits. That's all she needs to know. She deserves the truth.
The truth is classified, Warren. You signed papers agreeing to that.
Curtis's expression wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. We tell comfortable lies so people can sleep at night. That's part of the job, too. I wanted to argue. Wanted to say that Carol Pritchett should know her husband died fighting something ancient and evil, that his last act was an act of courage. But Curtis was right. That truth wouldn't comfort her. It would just give her nightmares. We were dismissed. Grace headed to her apartment in Virginia. Kirk disappeared without saying goodbye. Probably back to some cabin in Montana where he could pretend the normal world still existed. Lily said she was visiting family in California, but I suspected she was really going to a lab somewhere to run private tests on the samples she'd secretly collected. I drove west from the airfield, putting distance between myself and Michigan, found a Holiday Inn in Indiana, and paid for a week with my hazard bonus. The room was clean and warm and had a door that locked. I showered for 20 minutes, washing away 4 days of forest, then collapsed on the bed. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's face in that moment before Grace pulled the trigger. Not afraid, not even sad, just relieved that it was ending, that the thing growing inside him wouldn't have the chance to use him against others. I thought about Detroit, about the warehouse job I'd left behind, about my favorite booth at the diner where they made good pierogi. Simple things, human things. I could quit, call Curtis, tell him I was done, find another job that didn't involve walking into folklore-haunted forests. But the hazard bonus sat in my account, substantial and real, and I'd already seen what was out there. Already crossed the line from comfortable ignorance into terrible knowledge. There was no going back. On my phone, I pulled up the mission briefing for Oregon. Mount Hood. 7 people missing over the last 6 months. Native American legends about something that lived in the glaciers. Something that collected human faces. Different stories. Same pattern. Tuesday, Curtis had said. 3 days to pretend I was normal. 3 days to remember what it felt like to be afraid of ordinary things like bills and loneliness instead of constructs that mimicked humanity without understanding it. I ordered room service, a burger and fries, simple food, and turned on the TV. A Tigers game was on. They were losing, but I watched anyway, letting the familiar rhythm of baseball wash over me. Favorite things, I thought. I still had favorite things. That meant I was still human, but in 3 days, I'd go back into the darkness. I'd track another missing person through another cursed wilderness. I'd face another thing that shouldn't exist. And maybe this time, we'd find the person alive. Maybe this time, we'd actually save someone. That possibility was worth the nightmares. Outside my window, the Indiana night was peaceful. No scratched trees. No constructs. No giant things made of bone and antler. Just streetlights and distant traffic and the ordinary darkness that humans had learned to live with. But I knew the truth now. That darkness wasn't empty. It was patient, and it was always hungry. I finished my burger, turned off the TV, and forced myself to sleep. On Tuesday, I'd go to Oregon. On Tuesday, I'd do the job I'd signed up for. The job that paid well enough to keep me off the streets, to give me purpose, to make me believe I was fighting something worth fighting. The job that would probably kill me eventually. But not today. Today I was Warren Hayes, former staff sergeant, current field researcher for a government agency that doesn't officially exist. I was alive, I was clean, and I had 3 days of peace. It would have to be enough. I signed the papers in a windowless room in Detroit, 3 blocks from where I grew up, 2 miles from the house I was about to lose. The man across from me, Howard, he said his name was, didn't smile when he slid the folder across the metal table. He just watched me with eyes like frozen Lake Michigan in February, waiting. You understand the nature of the work, Howard said. Not a question. I understood desperation. I understood that my VA benefits barely covered my medications, that the auto plant job I'd held for 6 months had evaporated when they moved production to Mexico, that my landlord had stopped returning my calls about the heat that hadn't worked since October. I understood that my daughter Sophia lived 2 states away with her mother, and the child support I owed kept piling up like snow in a Michigan winter. What I loved, coffee from the corner bodega on Verner, old Motown records my dad left me, the Red Wings even when they were losing. None of that paid bills. I understand, I said, and signed my name. Warren Mitchell. The job was simple, Howard explained. Not simple like easy, simple like clear. People went missing in America's wild places, not the ones who wandered off trails drunk or underprepared. The other ones, the ones who vanished from locked tents, the ones whose clothes were found folded neatly on rocks miles from any path, the ones the park rangers stopped talking about after the first 48 hours. We're a rapid response team, Howard said. Department of Interior officially. Off the books, actually. You'll work with a small unit. Former military mostly. People who can handle unusual circumstances. The pay was more than I'd made in 2 years. The signing bonus cleared my debts. The work would take me away from Detroit, from the empty apartment and the memories of better days. Away sounded perfect. I met the team in Pennsylvania 3 days later. The Allegheny National Forest looked like something from a postcard in autumn. All gold and crimson leaves. Morning mist settling in the valleys like cotton. Beautiful, until you learned about the 3 hikers who'd disappeared there in the past month. Our team assembled at a ranger station that had been quietly evacuated. 6 of us, including me. There was Curtis, a broad-shouldered former Marine who spoke in monosyllables and checked his weapons with the precision of a watchmaker. Doug, thin and nervous, handled the technical equipment, radios, GPS, thermal imaging cameras. Perry, our medic, who had a soft Georgia accent and a prosthetic left hand he never explained. Evelyn, the only woman on the team who'd been doing this work for 3 years and had the kind of scars that made you stop asking questions. And Roy, our team leader, a gray-haired man in his 50s who'd introduced himself by saying, "You'll see things that don't make sense. Your job is to do the job anyway." The briefing was short. 3 missing persons, 2 college students and a local hunter. Last known positions formed a rough triangle about 4 miles into the forest. No distress calls. No signs of struggle at the campsites, just absence. Local folklore calls it the Wendigo, Roy said, pointing at a map. Hungry spirit that wears a deer skull. Makes people walk into the woods until they're lost. Then it takes them, Curtis snorted. We hunting ghosts now? We're hunting patterns, Roy said. The folklore matters because it tells us how people have tried to explain this before. These disappearances cluster around old stories. Michigan has the Dogman. Oregon has the tree whistlers. Every region has something. He looked at me. You believe in this stuff, Warren? I thought about the unemployment office. My daughter's voice on the phone asking when I could visit. The winter coming to Detroit. I believe in the paycheck. Good enough, Roy said. Gear up. We move in 30. The forest swallowed us whole. We found the first campsite just before noon. 2 tents, still zipped shut. Food hung properly in bear bags. A camp stove, cold but clean. 2 backpacks with wallets, phones, and car keys inside. They left on foot, Evelyn said, crouching by the campfire ring. In the middle of the night, by the burn pattern. Walked out with nothing. Direction? Roy asked. She pointed northeast, into deeper woods. Single file. Barefoot, both of them. We followed the trail. That's when I started noticing things that made my skin crawl. The birds had stopped singing. The usual forest sounds, rustling leaves, distant animal calls had faded to nothing. Just our boots crunching through underbrush. Our breathing. The occasional crackle of Doug's radio trying to maintain signal. Anyone else feel that? Perry whispered. We all felt it, like being watched by something patient. Something that had waited in these woods for a very long time. The footprints led to a clearing I wish I'd never seen. Trees around the perimeter had been stripped of bark in long vertical gouges, too high for any bear. In the center, arranged in a perfect circle, shoes, dozens of pairs. Some new, some decades old, rotting into the earth. Jesus Christ, Doug breathed. No one touches anything, Roy ordered. Warren, Curtis, perimeter watch. The rest of you, document everything. We extract in 10 minutes. But Curtis had already moved to the far side of the clearing, his rifle raised. "Roy, you need to see this." Carved into a massive oak tree, the letters were rough but clear. "They're still hungry." The date below it was yesterday's. We lost the trail in Pennsylvania. The 2 college students never turned up. The hunter's truck was found 3 counties away. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition. Local police ruled it a missing persons case and stopped asking questions. We moved on. That's how the job worked. We weren't there to solve mysteries. We were there to track, document, and try to bring people back alive. Sometimes we did. Most times we didn't. North Carolina was next. The Great Smoky Mountains, where a family of 4 had vanished from a rental cabin. Mother, father, 2 children ages 8 and 10. The cabin had been locked from the inside. When rangers broke in, they found dinner still on the table, ice cream melting in bowls. The television was on, playing a nature documentary about wolves. The family's car was in the driveway. Their luggage was in the bedroom. They'd simply ceased to exist in the middle of desert. "This is different," Evelyn said, studying the scene. The others walked out willingly. This was something else. Roy made us set up base camp a mile from the cabin. He wouldn't let us sleep there. "These places," he said, "they get into your head. Start following their rules, you end up following their rules." I didn't understand until the first night. I was on watch, sitting by our campfire, when I heard it. A child's voice, drifting through the trees, singing, "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." "Anyone else hear that?" I whispered into my radio. Static. Then Roy's voice, tight with tension, "Stay in the light, Warren. Don't look for the source. Whatever you do, don't follow it." But the singing continued. A little girl's voice, sweet and clear. Then a boy joined in, harmonizing. "Ashes, ashes, we all fall." A scream cut through the night. Not the children. Something else. Something that had learned to mimic human sounds, but didn't quite have the pitch right. Too high, too sustained, like a recording played backwards. Every hair on my body stood up. "Team, back-to-back formation now," Roy commanded. We pressed our backs together, facing outward, as shapes moved in the darkness beyond our firelight. Not quite human, not quite animal. They circled us, always just beyond clear sight. Curtis fired a shot. The muzzle flash lit up something I wish I hadn't seen. A figure wearing what looked like a deer skull, but wrong. The skull was too large, the antlers too many, and underneath it the body was stretched and pale like something that had been underground too long. The shapes retreated at the gunshot, melting back into the forest. "We leave at first light," Roy said. No argument. But Doug was missing when dawn came. We found Doug 3 days later, wandering a highway in Wisconsin, 200 miles from where we'd lost him. He couldn't remember how he'd gotten there. Couldn't remember the 3 days in between. He had leaves in his hair, and dirt under his nails, and when Perry examined him, he found dozens of thin scratches all over Doug's back. Parallel lines, too precise to be from branches. Doug quit the next day. I didn't blame him. I'd started smoking again. Something I hadn't done since Afghanistan. The nightmares were back too. Different content, same dread. We were down to 5. Howard, back in his climate-controlled office somewhere, sent us to Wisconsin anyway. A town called Eagle River, up north where the forests grew thick and dark. 7 people missing in 2 weeks. All adults, all locals, all with families. "This is escalating," Evelyn said during the briefing. "Whatever's doing this, it's getting bolder." Roy spread maps across the hood of our truck. Local tribe has stories about the Wendigo going back centuries. They say it walks when people get too hungry, too desperate. Not just for food, for anything. They say it feeds on want. I thought about my want, my daughter's face on my phone screen, the money in my account that still didn't feel real, the fear that it would all disappear like morning fog. "How do we stop it?" I asked. Roy looked at me like I'd asked how to stop winter. "We don't stop it, Warren. We track it. We document it. Sometimes we save people. That's all." "That's bullshit," I said. 7 people are missing. Families are destroyed. We have guns, equipment, training. We do something. You want to do something? Roy's voice was sharp. You walk into those woods with that attitude, you become the 8th missing person. This thing, whatever it is, it's been here longer than our country. Longer than our language. You don't kill it. You survive it. We went into the woods at dawn. The forest in Wisconsin was different from Pennsylvania or North Carolina. Older somehow. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking overhead like fingers. The ground was soft with decades of pine needles. It muffled our footsteps, made everything feel distant and close at the same time. We found the first victim by noon. A man named Harold, according to his wallet. He was alive, barely, standing in a stream, hypothermic, staring at nothing. When Perry tried to approach him, Harold started laughing. Not normal laughter. The kind that comes when something inside breaks permanently. They're beautiful, Harold whispered as we wrapped him in emergency blankets. They showed me what I really want. They're going to help me get it. What did they show you? Evelyn asked. Harold's eyes focused on her, and for a moment he seemed almost sane. Everything I've ever wanted fed to me one piece at a time, forever and ever and ever. He died before we got him back to the vehicles. Hypothermia, Perry said. But I saw his face in those last moments. He wasn't cold, he was starving. The final location was supposed to be Michigan, completing our circuit. But Howard called with new coordinates. Oregon. The Cascade Mountains. Emergency priority. Entire hiking party, he said over the satellite phone. 12 people. Vanished mid-trail. Their emergency beacon was triggered 3 hours ago, then went silent. Roy tried to argue. We're exhausted. We've lost team members. Whatever's happening, it's getting worse. The pay is double, Howard said. And Warren, you're team leader now. Roy, you're on medical leave effective immediately. Roy was gone when I woke up the next morning. Just a note. Don't follow the patterns. Break them. So it was 4 of us in Oregon. Me, Curtis, Perry, and Evelyn. 4 exhausted, traumatized people walking into a forest that felt wrong from the first step. The Cascades were beautiful in a way that hurt. Snow-capped peaks, alpine meadows. The kind of wilderness that made you feel small and insignificant. The hiking party had been following a popular trail. We found their last campsite easily. 12 tents, all empty. No signs of struggle, just absence. This is a trap, Curtis said flatly. Of course it is, I replied. Question is, do we spring it or do we leave? We found the trail markers 10 minutes later. Not official markers. These were made of bones, small ones, arranged in arrows, pointing deeper into the forest. We should turn back, Perry said. This is exactly what Roy warned us about. But I thought about Harold in Wisconsin, about the college students in Pennsylvania, about Doug's 3 missing days, about the families waiting for answers, about my daughter who I was doing this for, even if she'd never know it. We follow the markers, I said, but we follow them smart. Rope line between us. Night vision ready. First sign of trouble, we extract immediately. The bone arrows led us up the mountain, into places no trail existed, through boulder fields and across streams, always higher, always deeper into wilderness. The sun was setting when we reached the cave. It wasn't a natural cave. Something had carved it from the mountainside. The entrance was too regular, too perfect. And inside I could hear breathing. Multiple sources, slow and deep. Warren, Evelyn whispered. Look at the ground. Footprints. Dozens of them. Leading into the cave, overlapping. All different sizes. None leading out. The 12 hikers are in there, I said. Alive. Or something wearing their shapes, Curtis said, his rifle raised. I clicked on my flashlight and entered the cave. The chamber opened up 20 feet in, revealing something impossible. The walls were covered in carvings. Thousands of them, going back centuries. Stick figures, animals, symbols I didn't recognize. And in the center, arranged in concentric circles, people. The 12 hikers, all alive. All sitting perfectly still. Eyes open, not breathing. No, they were breathing. Just once every 30 seconds or so. Slow, hibernating. What the hell? Perry started forward. That's when they opened their eyes. All 12, simultaneously, and smiled. He's hungry, they said in unison. So hungry. We feed him our want, our need, our everything, and he gives us peace. The cave started to change. The walls rippled like water. The carvings began to move, stick figures walking across stone, and from the darkness at the back of the chamber, something emerged. I can't describe it. My mind won't let me hold the full memory. But I remember antlers. So many antlers. And eyes that held entire lifetimes of hunger. And a mouth that should not be able to smile but did. Warren Mitchell, it said. And its voice was every missing person. Every victim. Every desperate moment I'd ever felt. You came looking for them, but you're just as lost, just as hungry. You want your daughter back. You want to stop being poor. You want to matter. I can give you all of that. All I ask is that you sit, rest, let me ease your wanting. And God help me. I almost did. Because it was offering me everything. I could see it. Sophia smiling, running toward me. The house in Detroit. Warm and paid for. Purpose, meaning, everything I'd lost. Curtis's gunshot brought me back. He'd fired into the ceiling, and the creature recoiled from the sound. Run, he screamed. We ran. The cave collapsed behind us as we emerged into twilight. The entire mountainside shuddered, and somewhere far below I heard screaming. The 12 hikers, maybe. Or the thing wearing their hunger. I don't know. We made it to the vehicles by midnight. Drove without stopping until we reached Portland. Howard was waiting at a safe house with termination papers. The program is being shut down, he said. Too many incidents. Too many personnel lost. You'll receive full payment and a non-disclosure agreement. The people in that cave, I said. We left them. They were already gone, Howard replied. You understand that, don't you? The moment they walked into the darkness voluntarily, they were gone. You can't save them. You can only document. That's always been the mission. I signed the papers, took the money, flew back to Detroit. That was 3 months ago. I paid off my debts. I see my daughter every other weekend now. I got a job at a community college, teaching basic first aid. It's honest work, but I still hear them sometimes, late at night. The voices in the forest, singing, promising, offering to ease every ache, every want, every desperate need. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake, I know exactly where they are. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Oregon. I have coordinates. I have maps. I know where the hungry places wait. And I know that someday, when the weight of the world gets too heavy, when the bills pile up again, when my daughter's voice on the phone isn't enough, I know I'll go back. We all go back eventually. That's what the folklore is really about. Not the monster in the woods. The hunger inside us. The wanting that never stops. The creature doesn't make you walk into darkness. It just waits there, patient as stone, knowing that sooner or later, everyone gets hungry enough. I keep Roy's note in my wallet. Don't follow the patterns. Break them. But patterns are just another name for the paths we walk, because we're too tired to forge new ones. And I'm so very tired. The phone rang yesterday. Unknown number. I answered. Warren. Howard's voice. We're reinstating the program. Different approach. Higher pay. We think you learned something important out there. I should have said no. I should have hung up. But I thought about the bills that are already starting to pile up again. I thought about the custody battle my ex-wife is threatening. I thought about the ache of being ordinary in a world that doesn't care. When do I start? I said. Howard was quiet for a moment. Then you already have. Check your email. Michigan. The Upper Peninsula. 15 missing in 2 weeks. Whatever's there, it's feeding well. The folklore has 1,000 names. Wendigo. Dogmen. Tree Whistler. Shadow Walker. But they're all the same thing underneath. The thing that knows what you want. The thing that offers to take the pain of wanting away. I'm packing my bags tonight. I leave for Michigan in the morning. Back to where I started, closing the circle. I tell myself it's for Sophia. For the money. For all the sensible reasons. But late at night when the house is quiet, I hear the singing. I see those antlers in my mind. I remember that perfect moment when the creature offered me everything. And I know the truth. I'm not going to hunt it. I'm going to find it. We're all hungry here, at the end. The only question is what we're willing to feed to the darkness to fill the empty spaces inside us. I guess I'm about to find out. The reassignment letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I should have known then that something was wrong. Federal parks don't just shuffle experienced rangers to remote stations without reason. 20 years I'd spent in the service, mostly in the tourist-heavy parks where my biggest concerns were lost hikers and illegal campfires. Now they were sending me to the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, to a station so isolated it didn't appear on most maps. My supervisor wouldn't meet my eyes when I asked why. He just mentioned something about staff shortages, and handed me a file folder that felt too thin for a proper briefing. Inside were basic maps, emergency protocols, and a handwritten note paper clipped to the back. Trust your instincts. Lock your doors at night. Don't investigate sounds after dark alone. No signature. I drove up through autumn, watching the trees grow denser as civilization fell away behind me. The ranger station sat at the end of a logging road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. It was a squat wooden building with bars on the windows, which struck me as odd. What were they keeping out? The nearest town was 40 miles south, a collection of bars and bait shops where everyone seemed to know why I was there before I introduced myself. The previous ranger had left in a hurry. His belongings were still scattered around the station. A coffee mug with mold growing inside, a jacket draped over a chair, books left open on the desk. One of them was a journal, and against my better judgment, I read the final entry. Something screamed in the woods last night, not like any animal I know. It sounded almost human, but wrong somehow, like a person trying to remember how to scream. I'm requesting immediate transfer. That first week passed quietly enough that I started to relax. I fell into the routine of patrol routes and maintenance checks, radioing in my position twice daily to the district office. The forest was beautiful in its way, all pine and birch with carpet of needles that muffled footsteps, but there was a quality to the silence that unsettled me. No bird song, no squirrels chattering, just wind and the occasional crack of a branch. On the 8th night I heard it for the first time. I was washing dishes after dinner when something screamed in the darkness beyond my station. It started low, almost like a moan, then climbed into a shriek that made my hands shake so badly I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered on the floor, but I barely noticed. The sound went on for nearly 30 seconds, rising and falling, and then cut off abruptly. I stood frozen at my sink, soapy water dripping from my hands, staring out the window at nothing but blackness and the reflection of my own terrified face. Every instinct told me to grab my flashlight and investigate. That's what a ranger does. That's what I'd been trained to do. But I remembered that handwritten note, and I remembered the bars on the windows, and I stayed inside with the doors locked until dawn. The next morning I found tracks. They started at the tree line about 50 yards from the station and circled the building 3 times before disappearing back into the forest. They were canine, but far too large for any wolf or dog. Each print was easily 10 inches long, with claw marks that dug deep into the soft earth. I measured them, photographed them, and sent the images to the district office along with my report. The response came back within an hour, which was unusual. My supervisor's message was brief. Document and file. Do not pursue. Repeat, do not pursue. I tried calling him directly, but he wouldn't answer. I tried the wildlife biology department at the university in Madison, but the woman I spoke with became very quiet when I described the tracks and then suggested I might want to reconsider my career choice. She hung up before I could ask what she meant. That night I didn't hear the scream again, but something else happened that convinced me I wasn't dealing with any ordinary wildlife situation. I was sitting at my desk updating my logbook by lamplight when I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I looked up slowly and saw them in the window, 2 eyes reflecting my lamplight positioned at least 7 feet off the ground. They were amber-colored and much too large, with the intelligence behind them that made my stomach turn. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it moved, and in that brief moment before it vanished into the darkness, the lamplight caught enough of its form for me to see something that shouldn't exist. It was massive and covered in dark fur, walking upright on 2 legs like a man but hunched forward in a way that no human could manage. Its head was wrong, too angular and elongated, with a pronounced snout that could have been canine or something else entirely. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair with my service pistol on the desk and my radio within reach, listening to every sound the old building made as it settled. The rational part of my mind tried to explain what I'd seen. A bear standing on its hind legs, a trick of the light. Fatigue playing tricks on my perception. But I'd seen bears before. I'd seen wolves and coyotes and every predator native to North America. This was something different. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but determined. I had to know what was out there. I spent the next 3 days researching in town, talking to anyone who would speak with me. Most people deflected or changed the subject when I brought up strange animals in the forest. But the bartender at the Timberwolf Saloon, a weathered man named Earl who claimed he'd lived in the area his whole life, finally opened up after his third whiskey. "You're asking about the beast," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "That's what folks around here call it. Been seeing it for generations. Some say it's a dog that walks like a man. Others swear it's something older, something that was here before the loggers came. Native people got stories about it too, but they won't share them with outsiders." Earl leaned in closer, his breath sharp with alcohol. "My grandfather claimed he saw it back in 1952. He was hunting deer up near Black Lake when he heard something moving through the brush. Thought it was another hunter at first, so he called out. The thing that stood up wasn't human. He said it had the head of a wolf and the body of a man, covered in matted dark fur. It looked right at him, and he swears it smiled before it ran off on 2 legs faster than any animal he'd ever seen. I asked him why people stayed, if they knew something dangerous lived in these woods. Earl laughed, but there was no humor in it. Where else would we go? This is home. You learn to live with it. Stay inside after dark. Don't go into the deep woods alone. Don't investigate strange sounds. Most importantly, if you see it, you don't talk about it. Talking about it seems to make things worse. But it was too late for me to stay quiet. I'd already filed reports, sent photographs, made calls. If Earl was right about talking, making things worse, I'd already sealed my fate. I returned to the station that afternoon and spent hours going through old files I'd found in a locked cabinet. Previous rangers had documented encounters going back decades, though none of the reports had ever been forwarded to the main office. I found accounts of livestock mutilations, unexplained disappearances, and sightings of a creature that matched what I'd seen. One report from 1987 included a detailed sketch. A bipedal figure with canine features, powerful shoulders, and eyes that the ranger had described as disturbingly aware. The most disturbing file was from 2003. A ranger named Mitchell had conducted an unauthorized investigation after finding a deer carcass that had been torn apart with what appeared to be human-like hands. He'd tracked the creature to a cave system in the northern section of the forest and had gone inside despite explicit orders not to pursue. His final radio transmission was included in the file, a transcript that made my blood run cold. I found bones in here. Human bones. Oh God, it's coming back. It's coming back and I can hear it breathing. If anyone finds this, don't come looking for me. Just burn this whole godforsaken forest down. They'd found Mitchell's truck abandoned at the cave entrance. They never found Mitchell. I should have requested an immediate transfer. I should have driven south and never looked back. But something kept me there. A stubborn need to understand what I was dealing with. I told myself it was professional obligation, but the truth was darker than that. Some part of me needed to see it again, to prove to myself that it was real. On the 4th night after my initial sighting, I got my wish. I was conducting a late patrol along the western boundary, using the excuse of checking remote trail cameras to justify being out after dark. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate without my flashlight. I'd just finished inspecting a camera when I heard movement in the underbrush to my left. I froze, one hand on my pistol, and waited. The movement came again, closer this time, accompanied by a sound that raised every hair on my body. Heavy, deliberate breathing, like something large was scenting the air. I slowly turned my head and saw it standing at the edge of a small clearing about 30 yards away. It was even more massive than I'd realized, easily 7.5 feet tall when fully upright. The moonlight revealed details I'd missed before. Hands that were too long, with fingers that ended in thick claws, a chest that rose and fell with each breath, showing unusual musculature beneath the dark fur, a head that was distinctly canine, but with a flattened face that gave it an unsettling hybrid appearance. Its eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it back at me, and in that reflection I saw something that terrified me more than its size or its claws. Calculation. This thing was thinking, evaluating, deciding what to do about me. We stood motionless, regarding each other across the clearing. I could see its nostrils flaring as it tested my scent. Its lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth designed for tearing meat. But it didn't attack. It didn't even growl. It just watched me with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and I had the distinct impression that it was trying to determine whether I was a threat or simply another curious human who would eventually leave. Then, without warning, it turned and loped into the forest on all fours, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. I heard it crashing through the underbrush for a few seconds, and then the forest fell silent again. I made it back to my truck on shaking legs and drove to the station faster than was safe on those dark logging roads. Once inside, with every door locked and every window checked, I sat down to write my report. But as I stared at the blank page, I realized that I couldn't submit what I'd seen. No one would believe me. Worse, if they did believe me, they might send people to hunt it, and something told me that would end very badly for everyone involved. So I filed a routine patrol report and said nothing about what I'd encountered. I was becoming complicit in the conspiracy of silence that had protected this creature for generations. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my silence was also protecting something far more dangerous than I understood. 2 weeks after my encounter with the beast, winter arrived early. A massive storm system moved in from Canada, bringing temperatures that dropped to 15 below zero, and snow that fell so thick I couldn't see 20 feet from the station. I was effectively trapped, relying on my emergency supplies and the wood stove to stay warm while I waited for the roads to clear. On the second night of the storm, something changed in the forest. The usual nighttime sounds, already muted, disappeared entirely. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I sat by the stove trying to read, when I heard a sound that made the beast's scream seem almost comforting by comparison. A long, drawn-out wail that sounded like dozens of voices crying out in hunger and despair all at once. I'd heard about the Wendigo growing up, mostly from camping stories and horror tales shared around fires. The folklore described it as a malevolent spirit associated with winter, starvation, and cannibalism. According to legend, humans who resorted to eating human flesh in times of desperation could transform into Wendigos, becoming creatures of insatiable hunger that could never be satisfied no matter how much they consumed. I'd always dismissed it as myth, a cautionary tale used by native tribes to prevent cannibalism during harsh winters. But that sound in the darkness made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about mythology. The wailing continued intermittently throughout the night, sometimes close to the station, sometimes distant enough that I could barely hear it over the howling wind. Each time it called out, I felt a deep primal fear that went beyond rational thought. This wasn't the fear of a predator, like what I'd felt with the beast. This was something older and more fundamental, the fear of something that shouldn't exist, something that violated the natural order simply by being. When dawn finally came, I forced myself to go outside and investigate. The snow was hip-deep in places, and the cold was so intense that my breath froze in my beard within seconds. I didn't have to search long to find evidence of what had been out there. A trail of enormous footprints led from the forest to within 10 feet of my station before circling around and heading back into the trees. These tracks were nothing like what I'd seen before. They were humanoid but elongated, easily 2 feet long and 8 inches wide, with spaces between them that suggested whatever made them had taken strides of 10 feet or more. The prints were deep despite the fresh powder, indicating something impossibly heavy, but it was the details that truly unsettled me. Each track showed only 4 toes instead of 5, and the impressions suggested something walking on what looked like exposed bone rather than feet with flesh and padding. I followed the trail as far as I dared, my pistol drawn and my radio clutched in my other hand. The tracks led deeper into the forest, winding between trees in a way that seemed purposeful, as if whatever made them was following a specific route. After about a quarter mile, I found where it had stopped. A small clearing where the snow had been disturbed and stained with blood. The blood was fresh enough that it steamed slightly in the frigid air. It led to a partially consumed deer carcass that had been torn apart with such violence that pieces of it were scattered across the clearing. But it was how the deer had been eaten that made my hands shake. The choice cuts had been completely ignored. Instead, something had consumed the organs first, then cracked open the bones to get at the marrow, leaving the meat to freeze in the snow. This wasn't normal predator behavior. Wolves and bears ate differently, efficiently, taking the easiest meat first. This consumption pattern suggested something eating not for nutrition but from a hunger that couldn't be satisfied, exactly as the legends described. I was photographing the scene when I heard movement behind me. I spun around to find something standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by falling snow and the shadows between trees. It was tall, grotesquely thin, with grayish skin that seemed stretched too tight over prominent bones. Its face was sunken, with eyes that glowed faintly yellow and a mouth that seemed far too wide, filled with teeth that were too long and sharp to be human. We stared at each other across the blood-stained snow. Unlike the beast, which had seemed curious and calculating, this thing radiated only hunger and hate. Its jaw worked constantly, as if it were chewing on something invisible, and a low growl emanated from deep in its chest. I could see its ribs moving with each breath, counting them through its paper-thin skin. Then it opened its mouth impossibly wide and released that terrible wailing sound I'd heard the night before. Up close, I could hear the individual voices within it. Men, women, children, all crying out in anguish. The sound physically hurt, making my ears ring and my vision blur. I raised my pistol, knowing even as I did that bullets probably wouldn't stop something like this, when salvation came from an unexpected source. The beast burst from the tree line to my right, moving on all fours at incredible speed, and slammed into the Wendigo with enough force to knock it backward into the snow. What followed was a battle that defied everything I knew about animal behavior. The two creatures fought with savage intensity, the beast using its size and strength to grapple while the Wendigo slashed with those horrible teeth and claws made of bone. They were clearly ancient enemies, and I was caught in the middle of a territorial dispute that had probably been ongoing for centuries. I didn't wait to see who won. I ran back through the snow toward the station, my lungs burning from the cold air, my legs pumping as fast as the deep snow would allow. Behind me I could hear the sounds of the battle, roaring, wailing, the impact of bodies slamming into trees. I didn't look back until I reached the station and got inside. From my window I could see nothing but white snow and gray trees. The sounds of combat had stopped. The forest was silent again. That awful unnatural silence that I'd learned meant something dangerous was near. I spent the rest of that day and night sitting by the wood stove, my pistol on my lap, waiting for something to attack, but nothing came. When the storm finally broke the next morning and I could venture outside, I found the clearing where I'd witnessed the battle. The snow was trampled and stained with blood from both creatures, but there were no bodies, just two separate sets of tracks leading away in different directions. The beast had saved my life, though I couldn't begin to understand why. The winter deepened, and with it came more encounters. I saw the beast 3 more times, always at a distance, always watching. I heard the Wendigo twice more, though it never came as close to the station as it had that first time. I began to understand that I was living in a territory caught between two apex predators, and my survival depended on neither of them deciding I was worth the effort to kill. I also began finding things. Letters hidden in the station from previous rangers, too disturbing to file in official reports. Photographs tucked into old maintenance manuals showing evidence of creatures that shouldn't exist. A map marking territories with coded symbols that, once I deciphered them, revealed a horrifying truth. These creatures weren't isolated to this forest. They existed throughout the wilderness areas of North America, protected by a conspiracy of silence that stretched from local rangers to federal officials. The most revealing document I found was a memorandum from 1962, stamped classified, and forgotten in a water-damaged box in the station's crawl space. It outlined a policy called Conservation Through Ignorance, which essentially stated that the public must never become aware of cryptid species inhabiting protected lands. The reasoning was coldly practical. If people knew what lived in these forests, tourism would collapse. Environmental protections would be challenged, and hunting parties would form to exterminate creatures that might be the last of their kind. So we rangers became unwitting wardens of monsters, keeping the public safe through misdirection and lies while documenting encounters that would never see official light. The psychological toll on rangers was noted but dismissed as acceptable collateral damage. Several cases of stress-related breakdowns were mentioned, including the ranger from 2003 who disappeared investigating the beast's cave. I also found a journal written by a ranger named Sarah Chen, who'd worked this station in the late 1990s. Her entries became increasingly disturbed as she spent more time alone in the forest. The final pages were barely legible, written in shaking handwriting that deteriorated into frantic scrawls. She described dreams of running through the forest on all fours, of tasting blood and feeling an insatiable hunger. Her last coherent entry read, "I understand now why the natives feared the Wendigo so much. It's not just a creature you encounter, it's something you can become. The isolation, the cold, the hunger, both physical and spiritual, they change you. I feel it happening to me. I should leave, but I can't. Something keeps me here. Something is calling me deeper into the woods." Sarah Chen's personnel file listed her as resigned without notice, but I found her name mentioned in a local newspaper article from 1999. Local woman lost in winter storm. They'd found her truck abandoned on a logging road. They never found Sarah Chen. The implications terrified me. Was the Wendigo a separate species, or were they humans who'd transformed after spending too long in these cursed woods? And if transformation was possible, how long did I have before I felt that same call Sarah had described? In late February, as winter began its slow release, I had my final encounter. I'd been tracking what I thought were deer prints when I rounded a bend in a frozen creek bed and found myself face to face with both creatures. The beast stood on one side of the creek, the Wendigo on the other, and I was caught directly between them in what appeared to be a territorial confrontation. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. I could see the Wendigo's jaw working in that constant chewing motion, could hear the beast's low growl rumbling through the frozen air. They were both watching me, and I realized with crystal clarity that I'd stumbled into a negotiation. They were deciding who would claim me. Then the beast did something I never expected. It turned its massive head toward me and made a sound that was almost like a bark, sharp and commanding. Then it jerked its head toward the direction of the station. It was telling me to leave. The Wendigo hissed in protest, taking a step forward, but the beast moved to block its path, positioning itself between the Wendigo and me. I didn't need to be told twice. I backed away slowly, keeping both creatures in view, until I'd put enough distance between us that I felt safe turning around. I walked quickly back to the station, fighting the urge to run, knowing that running would trigger predator instincts I didn't want to awaken. When I reached the station, I immediately started packing. I'd spent 5 months in these woods, 5 months living among monsters and learning terrible truths. But that final encounter had shown me something important. I was the intruder here. This was their territory, their world, and I'd been allowed to live only because the beast had decided to tolerate my presence. That tolerance wouldn't last forever. I submitted my resignation that night via the radio. My supervisor didn't seem surprised. He didn't ask for an explanation, just confirmed my last day, and told me that a replacement would arrive in 2 weeks. I told him I'd stay until then, though I had no intention of actually waiting that long. But I did stay 1 more week, compelled by something I didn't fully understand. I spent that time documenting everything I'd learned, creating a file that future rangers could find if they looked hard enough. I marked locations on maps, transcribed testimony from townspeople who'd finally opened up to me, and wrote detailed descriptions of both creatures. I left it all in a waterproof case hidden behind the loose board in the crawl space, next to the classified memorandum and Sarah Chen's journal. On my final night, I sat on the station's porch despite the cold, looking out at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, the beast was watching. I could feel its eyes on me, just as I'd felt them dozens of times over the past months. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like an ending. As I sat there, I thought about all the rangers who'd come before me, all the ones who'd kept this terrible secret. I thought about Sarah Chen and Mitchell and countless others whose names were forgotten, but whose experiences lived on in classified files and hidden journals. I thought about the conspiracy of silence that protected monsters in the name of conservation and control. And I understood that I would join that conspiracy. I would never speak publicly about what I'd seen in those woods. I'd file my bland resignation letter citing personal reasons and take a position at a nice safe park where the most dangerous thing I'd encounter would be a confused bear or an aggressive raccoon. I'd become another link in a chain of silence that stretched back generations, because the alternative was worse. If the truth came out, if people learned what really lived in the deep forests of America, the response would be catastrophic. Hunting parties, military involvement, wholesale destruction of wilderness areas. And in the end, we'd lose something irreplaceable. The last wild places, the last mysteries, and perhaps the last few members of species that had existed long before humans walked this continent. So I would remain silent, and let others stumble into these woods unprepared, just as I had been. I would let them face the beast and the Wendigo, and whatever other things lurked in the darkness between trees. And maybe if they survived, they'd find my file and Sarah's journal and the memorandum, and they'd understand the choice they faced: silence or truth, complicity or catastrophe. There was no good answer. As dawn broke on my final morning at the station, I loaded my truck and took one last look at the forest. In the gray light of early morning, I saw a figure standing at the tree line. The beast, massive and dark, watching me leave. We regarded each other for a long moment, and then it turned and disappeared into the shadows between trees. I drove away and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I hear that terrible wailing sound in my dreams. And I wonder if the Wendigo is still out there in those dark woods, starving and hunting, forever unsatisfied. And I wonder if someday, despite everything I know, I'll feel that call Sarah Chen described. The call to go back to those woods, to walk deeper and deeper into the cold darkness until I'm so lost and so hungry that I forget what it means to be human. The worst part is that some small part of me wants to answer.